Pineapple. A long time ago in a faraway land, a young woman escaped a cult, vowing never to look at a man again, but then found herself falling in love in the most unexpected of places. When the young woman Tafara was 18 years old, she had attended the Jenaguru festival to celebrate the full moon, just like everyone in the kingdom did. And just then, her life changed. She had spent the whole moon working, going to the fields in the mornings to help prepare the field for the rainy season, which would likely start after the moon had begun to wane. Then the afternoons she had spent in her mother's pottery hut, trying to finish the orders before the humidity of summer came. So by the time the festival rolled around, she was looking forward to the respite and the merriment of the day, for no one worked on the day, but spent time preparing themselves for the festival that began at dusk. And how merry she had been that night, stomping her feet on the ground to shake the rattles on her ankles, gyrating her waist to the beat of the drums, and laughing into the wind, the air, her laughter dancing with the laughter of others in the air to create a resonance of joy. She was twirling in circles with her best friend as they danced to the beat of the drum when she felt an insistent hand tapping at her waist, and she had looked down. It was a young boy of about 7, and he was mouthing something to her, only the merriment was too loud for her to hear what he said. So she stooped down to his height and let him speak in her ear. Sissy Tafara, the boy said, Tongai says I should call you. He wants to speak to you. And before Tafara could ask where Tongai was, the boy had disappeared. Tafara stood for a moment, trying to still her giddy heart as she looked to the left and to the right, then behind her and ahead of her, hoping to see the young man's tall frame bopping over the crowd. She could not see him, but curiosity had her shove her way out of the denser circle to go in search of the young man. She sneaked around the party-goers, her eyes on the lookout for a strict mother who had given strict instructions that going to the festival would not be an opportunity to cavort with boys. But as she looked around, all your mother's words flew over her head. This was Tongai after all, the young man she had always yearned for, the young man she had always fancied. She had always seen him around the kingdom, and her heart had secretly pined over him, but he was already inundated by female attention, as handsome as he was. In her heart alone, Tafara had stood before her mirror a million times and practiced 1,000 ways in which she could approach him just to say hi, but once she saw him, that courage would quickly dissipate. And though they moved in the same circles as young boys and girls, and now as young men and young women, not once had she ever talked to him, and Tafara had been sure that Tongai did not see her and did not rate her. Until the afternoon a week ago, as she was coming from the stream alone, balancing a clay pot of water on her head and hugging another to her chest, when, as she took a bend in the path, she had come head to head with him. Startled, she had almost let go of the pot in her hands, while the one on her head shivered, threatening to fall. But he had been quick, stepping forward to hold the pot until her head stopped bobbing and she was breathing easier. But he had been too close then, and she had closed her eyes to capture his scent, which felt like a calm day. Then he had stepped back, and she had opened her eyes and looked into his, and he had said meaningfully, I am sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. She had attempted to nod, but the pot trembled again, and she opened her mouth to say thank you, but instead her tongue said, I'm sorry, and she almost berated herself for saying that, for what was she sorry for? But he laughed and she felt stupid, and he said, it's okay, before asking, do you need help with the water? She quickly said no, because she knew that a young man helping a young woman at any chore publicly would be a public declaration of courtship, and she knew how her father was and how he would begin counting her bride price cows over something so innocent. He nodded, then asked, "Are you sure you will get home all right?" "Yes," she said. Then he nodded again and said, "Sure. See you," before sidestepping her and walking around the bend. When she had wanted to shout after him, "When will I see you again?" But she was too tongue-tied to speak, and as she slowly found strength in her limbs and began to trek homeward, she hugged the memory of their short encounter tighter than the clay pot in her hands. And in the days to come, she had relived the encounter with equal parts regret of what she could have said and equal parts longing of another encounter. And now, as she searched for him, she felt dizzy with joy. Did this request mean that he had indeed seen her? Would this be the start of something beautiful? Hardly containing her joy, she walked around the festivities and still could not find him. Then she looked to her right and saw a shadow peering out from the market outbuilding and thought, could that be his shadow? And fascinated, hoping no one was watching, she hurried away from the festivities and walked to the outbuilding, part of her excited for the time she would likely spend with him out of the eyesight of the kingdom. She met the 10 around the outbuilding, a shy smile already on her lips, and looked up to the owner of the shadow, expecting to see Tongai. Except it wasn't Tongai, but a strange burly man who leered at her with an evilish grin on his face. Everything happened quickly because one moment she wanted to ask who he was while she backtracked quickly to the festivities, but that moment he had grabbed her arm. She opened her mouth to scream, but the scream had been quickly muffled by a set of hands from behind her that shoved a cloth right into her tonsils, and she knew that they were too assailants. She tried to scream out of their grips, but her body was too puny against their heavy frames, and she could feel herself being lifted and being carried into the night, and her life would change forever. Tafara remembered the sounds mostly. Firstly, the sounds of the festivities fading away as she was taken further and further away from her home. Then the sounds of the forest, of owls hooting, of dry twigs and dry leaves crackling and breaking, and of 1,000 cicadas singing orders to the night. Then the sound of humans, two humans, breaths labored, talks hushed, and encouragement in whispers. "Cover tracks, let's go. Cover tracks, let's go." She remembered, too, being passed from one pair of hands to another. She remembered trying to fight her way out of their strong grips and failing. It was dawn when the two men finally stopped and set her to the ground, but not before they had tied their hands behind her back and their ankles tightly to each other. She now watched them, first taking in a pair of identical faces they could easily morph into one and realizing that they were twins, then taking in their wide overfed physiques, then registering the glee and celebration in their faces. "We have done it," the twins said to each other as they gathered dry twigs and began to make a fire. "We have finally done it. If Baba were still alive, he would be proud, proud that we are striking back at the people who stole our heritage from us. Oh, what a time to be alive." She watched as they fetched water from a nearby brook, then filled an iron pan from the rucksack that one twin had been carrying. They made Zumbana tea and took out strips of dried meat which they offered to Tafara, who accepted, but when they removed the rag from her mouth, she screamed so loud that even the birds and insects of the forest were startled into silence. Then the twins had looked at her, startled too at the shrillness of your voice, but then they began to laugh and one of them said, "You can scream all you want, but no one can hear you. If I were you, I would save my energy." But she simply screamed again, much to the amusement of the twins who simply laughed and returned to their meal. When they were done, they offered her some food again, but again she screamed and they laughed, as they began to douse the fire and clear the area of their tracks. "She's pretty, isn't she?" one of the twins, Sungano, said. "How lucky we were to find a beauty." Rungano, the other twin, stopped with his chore and looked over at her in the early morning light before licking his lips and saying, "And ripe too, exactly what Baba would have wanted for us, to continue the Gara lineage with a wife from Gara, to rebuild our legacy with the seed of Gara, so that when we finally claim our land, we will have all the legitimacy in the world." Sungano laughed, then walked over to shoulder bump his twin before saying, "I see you are really taken by her. You can take this one and have her. When we venture out next moon, the one we get will be mine. Right, brother?" Rungano laughed and said, "Of course, and as soon as we get home, the business of making sons will begin." Tafara listened as they spoke, and for the first time since they had captured her, fear was beginning to grab hold of her. All the while they'd walked through the night, she had had hope that once they tired of carrying her, she would escape and try to find human habitation and look for directions back home. But now, as the twin brothers spoke, she wondered if she would be able to find the way. For, judging from the time they had abducted her at the beginning of the night to now, they had covered a long distance. And what was worse, she did not know if they had walked to the east or to the west, or to the north or to the south. She looked up at the rising sun and tried to determine where home could be, and still there was no clue there, just the blinding yellow of the sun and its rays sitting nonchalantly in the sky. She looked around them and took in all the trees, all the rocks, all the tiny landmarks in the clearing, and nothing looked familiar there. She battled with the fear that had now creeped into her every pore in her body, then asked, "Who are you? Where are we?" "Oh, it talks," they said in unison before Rungano continued. "That is a huge relief. You see, I am your husband, and this here," he pointed at Sungano, "is your brother-in-law. We are on the way home." Tafara's heart sank. At the very most, she had been prepared to hear them say that they had abducted her for ransom, and once that was paid, she would be returned home, and perhaps she would see Tongai again. But now, realizing that this was not on the agenda for the two men, she said in a squeaky voice, "Please, take me back home, please." The twins laughed and said, "But we are taking you to your new home, and don't you worry, you will love it there." And when they were finally satisfied that they had covered tracks of humans ever having disturbed the place, they set off again, this time untying Tafara's legs and leaving her mouth free although her hands remained bound. They walked quickly, and whenever Tafara attempted to stall them, they had no qualms of dragging her through bramble and thorn, until at last she realized that compliance would get her further unscathed. That first night, she acquiesced when they gave her food, for she was so hungry and ate even though her heart was breaking. She tried as hard as she could not to look at the moon as it rose, knowing that it was the same moon that had triggered her abduction. She tried hard not to think of her parents, especially her mother, knowing very well that they had neither gone to the fields nor pottered about in the pottery hut. And even worse, she tried not to think of Tongai and what could have been. It was difficult for her to resign to the fate she now faced, but there didn't seem to be many options for her. She couldn't fight. Her hands were literally and figuratively tied, and she had no weapon with her with which to fight with. And even if she had a weapon, she thought to herself, of what use was it to her since she was not trained to fight, and she was up against two big men? So she walked, day in and day out, walking between the two of them, Rungano leading the pack, Sungano making the rear, and her, Tafara, sandwiched between the two abductors. They camped at nightfall, and they cooked for her, and she would eat through tied hands before they would retire for the night, after binding her ankles, of course, and again sandwiching her with their burly frames. And whenever she would look up and glimpse at the waning moon, another sliver having disappeared, she would despair even more. She was further from home than ever, and she knew that any hopes of being found and of finding her way back were disappearing by the day. And then finally, 10 days into the journey, when she had begun to despair that they would never reach whatever destination that they were going to, they got to a mountain, trekked laboriously up it, and got to the most magnificent curves that Tafara had ever seen. She could even sense the change of energy from the twins, who had become grumpier with each step in the forest, but now their faces were open and lighter. "Welcome home," they said to her simultaneously as they walked into the caves. Tafara's wedding was officiated that afternoon. Once they had gotten into the caves, a hasty introduction had been made, and she, Tafara, met the twins' mother and their three sisters. Then the sisters had led her to the stream where she bathed, hands still tied, and then changed into the clean skins that they gave her. Then back in the cave, she and Rungano had stood in front of his mother, who had then carried out the customary rite of marriage, and the two were bound. Rungano did not even wait for night time. "The sooner she gets pregnant with sons, the less likely she will leave," he announced once the wedding was over, much to the agreement of the audience. Then he had dragged her to a sliver of the cave, and disregarding her tears and screams, had her way with him. And that became her life, serving and serving and serving him in the caves. Her respite came a week and a half later, when the twins bade farewell to their mothers and sisters. "We will be bringing Sungano a wife," they said, laughing. "We want to fill these caves with Gara laughter and joy, and what better way to do so than marry Gara wives?" And giving strict instructions to their mother and sisters to make sure that Tafara remained bound at all times, they left. The hours in the caves were interminable for Tafara, for there was nothing at all to do but sit and wait for the food to be brought to her and for the sun to set so she could toss and turn on her mat on the floor. She had been away from home for over a moon now, and all hope that she could ever be found was long gone. Besides, of what use would she be at home anyway after she had been deflowered? No one would want to marry her, and she would forever be at her father's home, bringing him shame for failing to bring him bride price cows. Even though it now hurt her to think about it, she knew that whatever possibilities she had dreamed of with Tongai, slim as they had been, would now never come to fruition. It was time to move on. So one morning, about 5 days after the twins had left, she approached the woman who was now her mother-in-law. "Please untie me," she said to the woman who frowned at her. "If my hands are untied, I can help you with the chores around here. I could even make some clay pots as I am skilled at pottery." But the woman's frown had simply creased even deeper into the grooves of her face. "Are you carrying? Is there anything inside here?" She poked Tafara's tummy. "Because as long as there is no child brewing there, then forget about being untied, which means it will be up to you to fall pregnant as quick as possible for you to enjoy freedom." But 2 days later, Tafara had more luck with Rungano's youngest sister Rumbi when they had gone to the stream for a wash. "Promise me you will not run away," Rumbi said as she glanced about to make sure no one was watching them. "I promise," said Tafara, even though running away was atop her mind. "Also," Rumbi said, "promise me that you will tell me everything about the outside world." "What do you want to know?" Tafara asked now as the relief of unbound hands washed over her and as she brushed her reddened wrists together. The girl looked out to the horizon, and framed against the setting sun, Tafara could not help but notice the acute sadness that emanated from her thin frame. She was beautiful, there was no doubt, but the beauty was almost invisible as her shoulders were permanently stooped and her eyes lacked luster and life. There was a resignation about her too, like she just lived because there was breath in her, but not because she really wanted to. Then she turned to Tafara and said, I want to know everything. Is the sun the same colors as ours here? Do you see other people there, or you live like us, just as a family? What do you do for fun? And Tafara told her of the kingdom she had lived in before being abducted, told her of her friends and her family, told her of the festivals they had had, from the full moon festivals to the rain-making festivals, then the harvest festivals, told her of the elaborate wedding celebrations and coming-of-age rites. And as she spoke, she could see Rumbi's eyes grow bigger and bigger, and some excitement, at least, dance in her eyes. When she was done talking, she asked her companion, So you don't know any of this? You have never been to a festival before? Rumbi laughed, although the laughter did not reach her eyes, then said, Festival? Where? It has just been my mother, my two sisters, and my brothers after Baba died. I have never been anywhere, not even to the foot of this mountain. I have told Amai to take me, and she has said there is nothing there except barbarians who will take my life and enslave me. Tafara wanted to laugh and tell her that the only barbarians she had ever experienced were Rumbi's twin brothers, but she held her tongue. The two young women were silent for a while as they frolicked in the cool waters. Then Tafara asked, Why do you live here? Where are you from? Where was your father from? Rumbi sighed and said, My father was royalty to Gara. His own father had been a firstborn twin, and then when the time came to choose the next king, the twins had been challenged to fight, with the victor becoming king. So it said my grandfather lost and he fled to these curves. He was too weak to return home, so when he married my grandmother and had a son, he told the son to go after the kingship. Yet my father would always say, I will go next year, until eventually he passed from a weak heart. But he had already given my brothers the mandate to fight for the kingship, and that is what my brothers intend to do. Tafara wanted to ask how, but she could already see that the young woman was already closing off to this conversation, and there was a slight fear in her eyes too, that perhaps she had said too much. So she got out of the water and sat by the banks for a while, and when Rumbi got out, she volunteered her wrists to her captive sister, and Rumbi tied them lightly before they returned home to the caves. It became some sort of routine, one both young women began to look forward to, and always Tafara told her of her life in the kingdom. Seeing how the conversations made Rumbi happy, Tafara would add more and more tidbits, sprinkling fibs and woven tales here and there to make her home sound like paradise. At first, they were just tales that she told, tales that also hurt her to remember as she knew that life was gone, but with time and with each careful tale, she began to realize the effect this was having on Rumbi. For one day, after Tafara had told her of the way in which courtship was undertaken, Rumbi had sighed and wistfully said, Oh, how I wish I could have that life too. I want to love and be loved, but there is no one here to love and to fall in love with. My brothers promised that they would find husbands for us, but my two elder sisters have not even married. What hope is there for me? She sighed again. It had been on the tip of Tafara's tongue to say, Oh, we can find you a husband if you want, but we will have to leave this place. But she did not say that. She knew it was too soon, and she had to tell more enticing stories. If only she could figure out what was wrong with herself as her body was becoming sluggish, and she was feeling more and more nauseous each day. That night, the twins returned, holding a young woman between them. Tafara gasped immediately when she saw her, for it was Rukudzo, a young beautiful woman from an elite family in their kingdom. Only Rukudzo now looked bedraggled, as though she had been dragged through the mountains. which was what exactly had happened as the twins exclaimed, "Stubborn one, this one, but we got her here all the same." And that very night, with her wounds and scratches, Rukuzo had been married off to Sungano, and later, as Tafara settled to serve her husband once again, Rukuzo's screams had echoed across the walls over and over again. In the days that followed, Tafara yearned to speak to the new girl, but the girl was guarded by the older sister and locked away in a separate part of the cave. From the news that filtered to her from Rumbi, the new girl was violent and was continuously gnashing at the tight ropes that bound her hands, that they had now tied her to her back. She had also taken to banging her head on the walls, so they had made her lie down so the bangs on the floor would be minimal. "She is feral," Rumbi explained to Tafara, "and it has been said you should not get any closer to her." Yet by the time the third girl arrived, the second girl was significantly subdued. Isolation had turned her into a zombie, and she did not talk or meet anyone's eyes, and carried out directions from the women of the cave, Rumbi and your sisters and your mother. By then, too, Rumbi had convinced her family that Tafara was no threat, and the bark binding her hands had been removed. And too, Tafara had discovered she was pregnant. Whatever schemes of escaping she had then made in her mind had to be abandoned. Where would she go pregnant? Even if she were to discover the way back home, she would only return to her home as a disgrace to her parents, a disgrace for bringing a bastard fatherless child, and a disgrace for not enlarging her father's cattle pens. In her quiet, alone moments, she mourned the life she had had, the dreams that she had pursued, the love she had hoped for, and the siblings and the parents she would likely never see again, together with the carefree nature of kingdom life as it had been. She loathed her husband, yes, and she knew she would probably loathe him forever, but she was glad that at most, in a moon, she saw him for probably a week, and then she was free. As your friendship with Rumbi blossomed, the two young women would spend time by the river where Tafara taught her sister-in-law to potter, or in the forest where the adept Rumbi had learnt to hunt from her brothers. And there Tafara learnt too, brandishing a weapon with uncertainty at first, and then with increasing confidence, and she became an important and respected member in the family, with Rukuzo, the second abductee, constantly being reminded, "Be like your sister-in-law, adapt and change," of which Rukuzo could only stare at the speaker blankly. Tafara recognized the third girl too, and unlike Rukuzo, this one came into the cave with resignation, and she was quickly married off to Rungano, effectively becoming Tafara's co-wife. But that was where their relationship ended, in sharing a husband. For the day after the third abductee arrived, Tafara had tried to talk to her, to ask her how her family was, to ask what was happening in the kingdom after her departure, but no sooner had Tafara cornered the girl had the two women been separated by Rungano, who told them, "You are never to speak to each other here. Understood?" There had been a rage in his eyes that had made both young women quickly nod and go to their separate duties. But the following morning, thinking that nobody would see them or hear them as they stood behind a cave wall, Tafara had tried to talk to the girl again. Yet Rungano had seen them and had followed the two with a kettle whip and mercilessly flogged Tafara, saying, "You are the older wife. You should be the one to follow instructions so your co-wife also learns to respect what I say. Yet you are the one who chooses to be this defiant, huh?" And the whip had only tired after Tafara's back was red and black with welts. Then he had turned to the younger wife and caressed her cheek and said, "You should not listen to this old hag who is hell-bent on separating us, okay? I told you even before you got here that there is something special about you, didn't I?" And the third abductee nodded. "So never doubt that, my love, because it would break my heart if I would be forced to flog you in the same manner as I did this miscreant, okay?" And she nodded again. "If ever she tries to talk to you again, please let me know so that I deal with her again, okay?" And again she nodded. It was Rumbi who cleaned Tafara up, dousing the walls with balm and then petting them with salt so they would dry up quicker. And when she was done, Rumbi had whispered, "You know you don't have to endure this, right?" Tafara had looked at her blankly. Rumbi looked around the cave to make sure no one was listening, then said, "You could always go back home." Tafara's eyes rounded bigger than usual, but then her heart sank. This was Rungano's sister she was talking to, and she had to be careful with voicing her thoughts, her feelings, because Rungano would probably hear of it and punish her again. So she laughed lightly and said, "This is home. I am going nowhere. And besides," she rubbed her still flat belly, "this baby belongs here with its people." And she closed herself off to that conversation. In the ensuing moons, more new girls came and were divided equally among the brothers, and Tafara recognized all of them, and still she did not speak to any of them. A vow of silence amongst the wives had been declared after Tafara's flogging, and the second sister walked around the curves, enforcing it, ensuring that if there was to be any communication between the wives, then it had to be done through her and her only. And as the number of wives in the caves increased, the third abductee, Rungano's second wife, was made co-enforcer of the vow of silence, and in return for her role, she was treated to the liver of fallen beasts, trinkets of gold and silver, and new clothes whenever the twins ventured out, rewards that no other wives got, and rewards that made their walk with their shoulders way high up. And as the days drove into one another, so too did Tafara's stomach grow, and with it, the excitement of new life among the cave natives. "It has to be a boy," Rungano said boastfully every time he was in the caves. "We need to leave a legacy for once we get back the Gara throne." And two, in the final days of your pregnancy, Tafara managed to silence all the thoughts in your head and look forward to the gift growing in your belly. She sat each day, waiting for the flutters in your tummy and the kicks that gave you joy. She tried all she could not to think about raising a child here in the caves, but the options she had were limited. And finally, one random afternoon, as she trekked to the caves from the river with Rumbi, her back and her stomach froze, and her breath stuck in her lungs, and a pain raked through her body that she had to stumble to the nearest tree to contain herself. And when finally she felt a bit better, the two of them rushed to the caves. In between the contractions, she saw her mother-in-law run around with clothes for the baby, with bowls of cold and warm water, and with sweat sponges to cool her forehead. The older woman showed to everyone else, including the twins, saying it was bad luck for women with no children to witness a woman give birth, while also boasting that she had given birth to all her 5 children alone. And finally, as the sun began to set, Tafara screamed and pushed one last time, and something slipped out of her, and a hearty, full cry followed. Immediately, a joy she had not experienced ever since she came to the curves suffused her, and she lifted her upper body to peer at this new creation. But all she saw was Mbuya, her mother-in-law, hunched over the baby in her hands and frowning. "What is it, Mbuya?" Tafara asked frenetically, as fear gripped her. "What is wrong?" Mbuya raised her face and looked at Tafara square in the eye and said, "It is a girl." So Tafara wanted to ask, but bit her tongue. So she waited instead for the older woman to clear up the birth mess and swaddle the child. And finally, when the baby was handed over to her, Tafara felt as if everything was going to be all right after all. "I will protect you. I will protect you with all I have, okay?" she whispered to the newborn, who cooed in response. There was no celebration amongst the twins either, and they did not even come to see the child or congratulate the mother. Yet even though a part of her celebrated and was overcome by wholesomeness because of this moment, she was also desolate away from her loved ones. And try as she might not to cry, she eventually gave in and wept onto the baby in her arms. That night, Mbuya came into a part of the cave and asked, "Have you fed the baby?" Yes, Mbuya, Tafara responded. Then the older woman outstretched her arms and said, You need some rest as a new mother. Give me the baby so you can sleep. And trustingly, she did so, and would let her regret it with all her heart. For when she awoke the next morning, it was Tumbuya kneeling by her side, telling her that the baby was gone. What do you mean gone? Tafara sprang onto her feet, ignoring the soreness of her muscles. She was all right last night when I gave the baby over to you. It happens, Mbuya said, looking at the younger woman. It happened to two of mine. Sometimes they are just not strong enough. I want to see her, Tafara said, running out of the enclave and to Mbuya's rooms. Mbuya tried to restrain her, grabbing onto her arm and saying, A mother should not look upon the face of a newborn who has passed, for the ancestors will show you the face of death forever, and your womb will not be blessed. Let us, the elders, deal with everything. But the younger woman was stronger and jerked her arm away and ran onto the enclave, where she found a parcel covered underneath some skins. She wrenched the skins away, and there the listless, white face of her love had closed her tiny eyes forever. Tears filled her eyes, blinded her, but it was not before she saw two red, thumb-like marks on the baby's throat. Then she was grabbed away by one of the twins, and Buya grabbed the baby and went to bury her alone. Tafara was inconsolable. Nothing anyone would say would dry the tears that free flowed down her cheeks. In the moons that followed, she watched the younger wife's bellies grow, and each pregnancy was like a knife in her belly. But one night, 3 months later, after she refused to save her husband, he had taken the whip and flogged her again and told her, weeping over a daughter like that, huh? Of what use would the girl have been to us? Quiet. And as she lay with him later, she remembered the thumb-like marks on your daughter's neck, and she knew, she understood. So she wiped her tears and stopped crying and waited. Abductee number 2 and 3 gave birth shortly thereafter, both of them to boys, and the boys survived. Then number 4 gave birth to a girl, and the girl did not live to see tonight. Tafara would have resigned herself to this fate had Rumbi not asked her again about life beyond the mountains. They were sitting by the river after having gathered some fruit in the mountains when Rumbi said, Where is your home from here? Startled by the conversation of the home she had begun to forget after over a year in the mountains, Tafara shook the cobwebs from her mind and said, I don't know. We took so many turns that I have forgotten whether it was north or south, or east or west we came from. Rumbi nodded, then said, Do you want to return? A thrill rushed through Tafara, but she had to remember who she was talking to, so she said, I used to, but not anymore. This is home now. Rumbi laughed and said, I know you are lying. When Tafara did not say anything, Rumbi sighed and continued, Tafara, I am rotting away here. Every moon, I see my brothers bring women here to help them fulfill their own purposes, and these women are starting families and living their lives. But what about me? Is my life forever going to be dictated by guarding their wives? When will I meet my own man, start my own family, live according to my dreams? Huh? Again, Tafara did not respond. She knew that she did not want to be a part of this conversation, yet Rumbi yapped on. I want to leave, Tafara. I want to go and live my own life, but I am scared. I cannot do it alone. Look, there is nothing holding you back. Don't you want to go with me? Tafara knew how true this was, yet still refused to clip onto the bait. This is my home now, Rumbi. I am married to your brother, and we are trying for another child. Besides, unlike you, if I leave this place, there is no place for me outside, for I am a soiled woman. So whatever plans you have, do not include me. Now, she stood and grabbed a basket of fruit. Let's go home. Yet Shumbi was relentless, for the next time they went into the forest, she came back with news. I asked the other wives surreptitiously, of course, where your home is, and the ones who could remember say to the northwest. One of them even drew me a map of how they had trekked the forest on the ground, so I have a rough idea. And when Tafara did not respond, Rumbi continued, I don't care what you say, but whether you join me or not, I am leaving. Starting tomorrow, I am bringing bits and pieces of my luggage with me. By the time the next moon rolls around and my brothers have gone to forage for another wife, I will be gone. And true to her word, every single day she brought something, a favorite cloth here, a skin for sleeping in there, an iron pot, a flask of water, slowly building her stash. And as Tafara watched, curiosity and desire also grappled with her. Her blast had come, meaning she was not pregnant, and therefore she knew she would be better off living without any encumbrances. But still, there was nothing for her back home. People had already moved on, she was sure, and she was not sure she wanted to be shunned because of the abduction. But then, 2 days before the twins were to depart for Gara, another baby girl had been born, and they had not even seen a full day when she was declared gone. And the still fresh wound in Tafara was stirred so badly that the afternoon of the burial she had taken a favorite wrapper to the stream and added it to Rumbi's stack of runaway goods. 4 days later, Rumbi had brought a rucksack and was stuffing the few things that they had managed to pilfer and which would make their disappearance difficult to dictate until at least they were further from the caves. There was a frantic energy around Rumbi as she shoved their belongings in the bag and she kept looking up and smiling. Freedom. But Tafara found it hard to join in the enthusiasm. What if we are caught? She asked his sister-in-law. By who? Rumbi challenged, laughing. The twins normally take 10 to 12 days before they return, and by the time they return, we will be far gone. Here at the cave, no one will go after us. My mother can hardly walk out of the cave, and my sisters are too afraid of the outside world. They would not even think of following us. Don't worry, we'll be safe. But Tafara remained worried when at mid-morning Rumbi shouted along the corridors of the cave for her. Let's get to go hunting while it's still day, Rumbi said, all slyness, trying to ensure that no one would look for them until later. It was an advantage that it was only the two of them who could hunt and would always bring the meat when the brothers were not around. So their departure was not questioned, and both, holding their breaths in their thoughts and their weapons in their hands, briskly walked out of the caves and into the trees. They did not waste time. Once they realized they were out of earshot and eyesight, they increased the pace of their strides and went to their hiding place to extract the rucksack before beginning a hasty tumble down the steep slopes of the mountain. And once on flat ground, they increased their pace, following the directions that Rumbi had gotten to follow the sun to its northern west. It took Tafara 3 days to finally release the breath in her throat. I don't think they will find us, she said to Rumbi that afternoon as they decided to take a break by a glade. We have walked too far from the caves for anyone to catch up with us now. Rumbi, still giddy and exhilarated from the journey, stretched out by the grass and lay looking into the sky. And even if anyone tries to capture me, I will fight to my death. Nothing will make me go back to the caves, ever. Yet even as they relaxed, Tafara remained alert. No matter how many times she had told Rumbi that they had to be on the alert for the twins, for they would most likely use the same hidden route on the way back to the caves, Rumbi would laugh. The world is so large, there is absolutely no way we will walk in the same exact path. Don't worry, my sister, we are safe. What if they follow us here? Tafara asked. They might want to intercept us before we reach Gara so that we do not break the news of their whereabouts to the people of Gara. Again, Rumbi laughed and said, Of course they would think we are not dumb enough to go back to Gara for the exact reason that it will be an obvious choice for us. They will not even look for us on this path here. And these reassurances from Rumbi lulled Tafara. Tafara could see the effect this journey was having on her sister-in-law, and instead of the sad, hunched young woman Tafara had met, Rumbi had become carefree and joyful even, and Tafara could not help but feel at ease too. From the moment they had left the caves, Tafara felt as though a burden had been lifted off her shoulders. The caves had become claustrophobic after her daughter had passed, what with each wall, each engraving, each stalactite, reminding her of a different stage of her pregnancy. But now, in the open air, it was as if she had allowed the wound into the open, and she was beginning to heal at last. The only qualm she had with this journey was Rumbi's pace. There was no eagerness to get anywhere in Rumbi. They would walk from the early hours of the morning, and by mid-morning she would be tired, and by noon she would be begging for a place to settle for the night. In her defense, Rumbi would say, "I am not used to walking long distances. Please, bear with me." And Tafara had no choice but to comply, for she had no rush to get home anyway, not with the trepidation that raced in her heart, fear of how she would be received and accepted by her family. They walked like that for 2 weeks, their pace unhurried, leisurely, and there had not been a disturbance on the path. They had met some travelers along the way, and they would ask the friendly ones of the way to Gara, and often found themselves on the right path. But for the most part, they kept to themselves, and yet, with each step, trepidation filled Tafara's heart. What would she say when she got home? How would she be received by her people? Would she be able to have a normal life after having shared a bed with a stranger? She doubted that, yet she still trudged on, and would have continued to do so had tragedy not struck in the third week of their journey. The day of the tragedy had started seemingly like any other day, and the duo had woken up to stoke last night's fire and heat their food before they packed and set off. They had asked the last group of people they had met how far Gara was, and had been told that it was less than 5 days away. And so, as Rumbi's excitement rose, Tafara's spirit had begun to dampen, yet she could not tell Rumbi that. They had set off just as the sun had begun to rise and traipsed through the woods, Rumbi's increasingly excited chatter competing with the birds' catcalls in the air. But sometime that morning, Tafara's eyes had begun to sense a third presence, a human presence behind them. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, her ears that were hearing things, but after a while, she knew that there was definitely someone behind them. She tried to warn Rumbi, but Rumbi kept talking and talking, oblivious to any sounds than the sound of her voice, which now unconfined, since coming from the caves, felt like the most glorious voice ever to her. And now the footsteps that were behind them were coming closer, and somehow, from the sound, Tafara knew that it was not just one person. "There is someone here," Tafara whispered to Rumbi. "Someone has been following us." Both women then stood, listening to the sounds of the forest, but whoever was behind them too had stopped. When all had been silent for a while, Rumbi burst out laughing and said, "You are hearing things, sister-in-law. It was probably an animal or something. There is no one here except ourselves. Let's go." And she grabbed Tafara's hand. But they had not taken more than 5 steps when two chillingly familiar voices spoke and said, "Stop." It was the twins, Rungano and Sungano. Tafara's heart sank right to the forest ground, and without even turning, she felt her bladder open, and a trickle of urine ran down her thighs. But just at that moment, Rumbi was shoving the rucksack into her hands and whispering, "Go, they want you. They won't do anything to me." Tafara would never know where she got the strength to run, but survival must have propelled her forward. For one moment she had been standing in fear, but the next she had been ducking from the whoosh of a spear that sped above her head as she ran blindly into the foliage of trees. Behind her, she could hear the thunderous hooves of a twin, but his pace was slower, and she somehow knew that he would catch her if she continued running. As soon enough she would tire against his stamina, and he would catch her. So, using the tactic of confusing the enemy with the wrong tracks, she circled around the trees, then quickly tiptoed towards a low bushed muacha and quietly climbed as high as she could, hoping the dense leaves would cover her completely. From a perch up on the tree, she saw Rungano, her own husband, searching the ground for her tracks, circling and circling the trees, and finding nothing else to lead him to her, until at last, shoulders hunched, he gave up. She watched him as he walked back to the path where the twins had caught them, and where Sungano stood with Rumbi, holding her by the scruff of the neck. From a perch, she could not hear what Sungano was saying, but Rumbi's voice was loud, and Tafara heard her shout, "I also want a life. I want to marry, have my own children, my own family." One of the twins must have said something, for Rumbi shouted, "Leave me then, let me go my own way." But Sungano's voice had risen. "You are going nowhere, traitor." "And me then," Rumbi shouted, "for there is no way I am going back to those claustrophobic caves. I'd rather my life ends here." Sungano said something that Tafara did not hear, and Tafara saw her enraged husband walk towards his sister and tie it down, much in the same way she, Tafara, had been transported to the caves. Then he pushed the young woman onto a tree trunk, shouting, "How dare you teach my wife to defy me? You shall suffer for that." Then Rungano had stepped back before shouting, "Family is only family when we respect each other. You are no longer one of us, but a traitor, and we will treat you like we have treated other traitors in the past. It's a good thing you are just a woman, and the earth and our ancestors will not be too angry to welcome you back, for you bring nothing to the world except motherhood." Then Rungano clicked his fingers at Sungano, who stood with bow cocked. And Tafara watched in horror as the arrow was released from the toad string and went to land in Rumbi's chest. And more arrows followed, each hitting the target, until at last Rumbi's head lowered to the side and hung with shame forever. Then Rumbi saw the twins begin to hunt for her, looking closely at the ground for her footsteps. Perched on a branch, one hand hugging its sturdiness, the other hugging the rucksack, the young woman sucked her stomach in and willed herself not to breathe, alternately watching them, then drifting back to lifeless Ruby, and she found herself fighting against the warm tears threatening to fall down her cheeks. The young woman who had made her life so much easier for the past year was gone. She watched as finally, after over an hour of searching, the twins eventually gave up and then walked away out of her sight. But she remained in the tree as the sun rose to noon, then to mid-afternoon, then to night. Then eventually, the crouching in the tree situation began to feel untenable, and she allowed herself a little prayer of protection before climbing down the tree. Then she said a prayer of acceptance for Rumbi's soul before she snapped the rucksack over her shoulder and began walking in the dim light of night, walking in the direct opposite of Gara, walking to wherever her feet would lead her. At first, she walked briskly, but by the end of the night, she was sure that she had not been followed, and then took a more sedate pace. She knew that she would never return to Gara, because what if that was the first place they looked for her? She had completely changed tracks, and instead of east, was now facing south. She had no idea what would be waiting for her wherever she was going, but all she prayed for was that she would not come across the twins again, especially after witnessing their ruthless treatment on their own sister. And even now, as she thought of Rumbi, tears pooled in her eyes. She did not stop when day broke, knowing that stopping would mean remembering the trauma of the past day, the past her. So she pushed her body beyond endurance, simply willing her mind to put one foot before the other, then the other, then the other. And then eventually, In the middle of the afternoon, she stumbled into a village that sat by the edge of a river. Her feet were sore from walking, her body too exhausted to move any further, her soul tired and seeking reprieve, and grief haunting her heart. She stumbled onto the river bank and realized her feet would not take her any further, so she collapsed onto the cool sand and closed her eyes, hoping that the closed eyes would keep all reality at bay. She did not know how she slept, but when she eventually opened her eyes, it was dusk, and she was looking into the kindest eyes she had ever seen. And even though her first instinct would have been to bolt, the eyes were making her feel safe, so she just continued to look into them unashamedly. The eyes also never left hers as they searched for signs of duplicity in her, and when finally they were satisfied that it was just a lost woman, the owner of the eyes asked, his voice baritone yet calm, "Are you lost, young lady?" "No," Tafara wanted to say, "I am not lost. I am home." But she couldn't speak as a lump had lodged in her throat and tears pooled in her eyes. Seeing how helpless she was, the young man, Ngoni, said, Come to our home. I can't leave you here on the riverbank alone at night." And again, when Tafara did not move, Ngoni scooped her into his arms and carried her into the village. When they arrived, Tafara saw the people who came to see the strange young woman, but her tired soul did not register them. Sleep did not take long to steal her, and when she awoke, it was sunrise, and a young woman had brought a tub of hot water to her heart. Then when she was done eating, the same young woman brought a hot plate of sadza and fish, which a now hungry Tafara devoured. When she was done, the young woman told her that a court was being held at the Dare, and she, Tafara, would have to introduce herself, as the little kingdom did not want to harbor a fugitive or a thief who would likely bring them trouble. And at the Dare, Tafara spoke, her voice candid and speaking through tears, telling the kingdom of all she had endured in the past year. "I can't promise you that I will not bring trouble, for I am likely being looked for by my husband and his brother. But what I can assure you is that all I want to do is live amongst people again. I want to live again, and I promise you that should I be given an opportunity, I will use it to the best of my advantage by being a law-abiding citizen." The kind old queen smiled and said, "It would be folly for us to turn away a young woman who has endured so much hardship. As such, we welcome you, Tafara, and we hope our little kingdom of Tapi will give you respite and rest, and you can flourish here. In addition, we will probate you for 6 months, and once you pass, we shall reconvene, and you will be given the same rights as all the other citizens of this country." And Tafara had been returned to the home she had spent the night in, a home she later learnt belonged to an elderly childless widow who had opened her arms for the stranger. For 6 weeks, Tafara stayed within the homestead, reveling in the love the older woman showed her, trying but failing to stop herself comparing the gentility of this woman to Rungano's mother's harshness. In the 6 weeks, she felt her body begin to heal, the scratches from running through the wild, turning to scabs, then scars, then new skin again. But her mind was still heavy. The image of the baby she had held for only a few hours haunted her soul. Rumbi's body, tied to a tree, head lolling downward, ached her heart, and Rungano's cruelty tormented her mind. She did not even try to think of her home of Gara, of her parents. It was a home that she would likely not visit in the near future, and she knew that if her mind were to dwell too much on that, she would die of a broken heart. "You should go out sometime," Mbuyamizi, who had become her de facto guardian, urged her one day. "Staying indoors will heighten your melancholy. Go out of the house, find friends, go to the river, inhale the breeze, do something. Just don't remain here, inside, alone." And one morning, she convinced herself to go out and walk to the river, and as she sat by its banks, Feeling its slight speed on her body, she looked up to the sky, closed her eyes, and forced her taut-lipped muscles to smile until a shadow fell upon her. Immediately, terror seized her, and thinking it was the twins, she sat bolt upright, ready to surrender to their bloodthirst. And then she opened her eyes, and immediately saw the eyes of the young man she had met the first day she had stumbled upon the riverbank. "We meet again," he said, then asked, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" She nodded, not because she was enthused by company, but because he looked so safe, so kind. They sat there for a long while, hardly speaking, but their unspoken conversation so powerful it might as well have been spoken. She never asked him what his name was that day, but moons later, after they had both discovered their shared love for pottery and had spent time collecting clay to construct pots and utensils, and had opened a store in the market, she allowed herself to whisper his name one night while alone in her room. And that small whisper, like a newly untangled cord, unraveled the pent-up pain in her, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt like she was more than what had happened in the caves. She felt like freedom. The end. Thank you for watching and listening to the end, and if you like this, please leave some love. More of the story coming up in a sequel soon. Lots of love. Bye.